also, Lord, everyone in our sphere of influence, the people that we can contact, the people that we see and talk to, that will be a good influence for you, that we will be a good witness. Lord, I pray the message today, as we hear this message, will touch our hearts and help us to realize the great sacrifice that's been made on our behalf for one thing. And we ask in Jesus' name for that. Amen. You know, sometimes you can just open your Bible and read the stories and get a lot out of it, the way it's told sometimes. And particularly, you notice I titled the message today, The Worst Day, because it really got me thinking, particularly on Friday. You know, when you think about Friday, they call it what? What did they call it yesterday? What did they call that? They call it Good Friday. There's nothing good about that Friday. Like I've tried, I looked up, tried to reason with that a little bit, and I have people say, well, it's the day that Jesus died for us, that makes it Good Friday. It was a very bad Friday. Like if you were there was nothing good about it. I can guarantee you after the disciples, after that Friday, as a matter of fact, Friday was terrible and Sabbath was even worse that weekend. It was. It was awful. Nothing good whatsoever. And we're going to talk about that some today. Sound like a good message, doesn't it? Let me read here, Luke 23, verse 33. I'm just going to read that verse real quickly here. It says, when they were come to the place, which is called Calvary, meant the place of a skull, and they theorized that the rock place where they crucified kind of had the appearance of a skull head. That's where they would crucify folks there, I guess. There they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. No emotions, just simply stated. They crucified him. I want to tell you the story today because of the weekend that is. I'm just going to tell you the story. But we're going to try to tell it a little bit from the disciples' perspective in some ways. Like the worst day ever. That was Good Friday, not Good Friday. From the disciples' perspective, it was probably the worst day ever. Incidentally, and I want to think about this, have you had your worst day ever yet? Have you ever thought about that? Everybody's going to have their worst day ever. At some point in your life, you're going to have your worst day ever. Have you had your worst day ever? I thought about that, and I got really thinking about that. Like, when I start thinking along these lines, I start getting like, oh man, this is terrible, right? But my worst day ever, if you haven't had it yet, it's yet to come. You may think you had your worst day ever, but probably haven't. You ever considered that? I think the worst day I ever had that I could remember back, first of all, was when I was about 10 years old, when I got home from school and I found out my great-grandmother had passed away. I was really close to her, was getting ready, she'd passed away. Then my next worst day after that, when I found out my grandfather died, and then the worst day I've ever had was the day that I was told my dad passed away. Somber, isn't it? Worst days ever. I thought about, well, maybe the worst day I ever have will be the day I die, and it probably won't be the worst day I'll ever have. Hopefully it'll be somebody else's worst day. If you've lived right, the day that you die will be somebody else's worst day, not yours. Isn't that right? Because likely it's going to come quickly. It'll be quick, out of the way, or maybe you'll be fortunate enough to die in your sleep, or maybe whatever it is will be instant. But that probably won't be your worst day. Honestly, the worst day probably for all of us will be the day that we find out someone else has passed away. Someone we're close to. The worst day for these guys, I think the worst day that's ever happened on this planet, which is really fascinating. The worst day of the entire planet is something people call Good Friday. It was. It was the day, and as we talked a little bit about this before, it was the day that it was demonstrated just how mean that mankind is. Jesus comes, and the Son of God comes, and we kill him. A man that never did anything wrong, we killed him. That's got to be the worst day ever. The day that man killed Jesus. We call it Good Friday. Again, some people argue that it was a Good Friday because that was the day Jesus died for our sins, but it was a terrible day. Imagine being a disciple that day and watching this scene. I love reading the Bible, and honestly, I actually try to do this with an effort. Now, I want to encourage you to try to do this when you read sometime, is try to put yourself at whatever you're reading in the scene. Picture, if you will, what it would be like if you were there. Or try to imagine what it would be like right now if someone that you cared for dearly was getting ready to be executed. It happens. It even happens today, not along the same lines of what we're reading here, but people that are on death row have families. You know that, right? And then ultimately, when they go to be, no matter how evil or how bad this person was on death row, who's probably definitely deserving what they get, when they go to be lethal injection or electrocuted or whatever it is that they get for their punishment, when they go to do that, the families are just in terrible pain, right? No matter how you feel about how the person that's actually doing the one that's going to be killed, the family is suffering when they see that happen. Right? It doesn't usually make the news a whole lot, the other side of that story. It's just a bad situation all the way around. But now imagine yourself on this day, on that Friday, if you will. The mocking, the scourging, the crown of thorns, the cross. Imagine watching the scene. Someone that you know is completely innocent. Imagine that so-called Good Friday when all of your hopes are dashed upon a rock called Calvary, the place of the skull. Doesn't sound like a Good Friday at all to me, does it you? Like the worst one ever. I want you to think about that Friday from the disciples' perspective. You were planning to be vice king of the planet. The day before this happens, your hopes, your dreams, your plans was to be vice king of the planet. Just a few days prior, that's what you thought was going to happen. You know and you saw the power that Jesus had. And now, at this time, well, let's pick it up in John chapter 16 and verse 19. It's getting ready to come to that place. John 16 and verse 19. This is an interesting, little different message than what I usually into preaching and things like that. We're going to tell the story. I just want to tell the story for this season, if you will, and try to help us to understand. Incidentally, what we're going to read about is something we'll be able to apply to us as well. You'll be able to apply it to you. I promise. You'll be able to apply it to you. John 16:19. Now Jesus knew what they desired to ask him. So he knew what the disciples were desiring to ask him. And so he says to them, do you inquire among yourselves of what I have said? A little while, and you shall not see me. And again, a little while, and you shall see me. Now, keep in mind, if you remember how many times we read before in other messages and other passages, particularly through the other Gospels, when Jesus would say something along the lines of Mark chapter 8, Mark chapter 9, Mark chapter 10. Remember those texts where he said, hey, I'm going to be betrayed, I'm going to be beat up, I'm going to be spit upon, I'm going to be crucified. 3 days later, I'll rise again. Remember how many times he said that? We've looked at that many times before. He let them know how bad it was going to be, but yet their mind wouldn't grasp it. So here, he's dealing with the same thing, and if you look at verse 20, he says to them, verily, verily, I say unto you, that you shall weep and lament. Good Friday. Doesn't sound good to me, does it you? You're going to weep and lament, and I'm going to call that a happy day. Wasn't a happy day at all. The world will rejoice. You shall be sorrowful, but your sorrow shall be turned into joy. Once again, he's reminding them, like, whenever this happens, please don't worry. Everything will be all right. And I love this. By the way, I love this text a whole lot, even for personal reflection and personal just thinking about, because your life, you're going to have the worst day. But don't worry, because your sorrow eventually will be turned into joy. You know, that's a promise for all of us, for all times. If you're faithful to him and you don't give up, he can say the same thing to you and I now. You're going to have sorrow. You're going to weep and lament. And the wording there is very strong, by the way. Weeping and lamenting. You're going to have a terrible time in this life. But don't worry. Your joy, your sorrow will be turned into joy. That's good hope, isn't it? And I love it that Jesus gives this promise to them, and you would think when they see Jesus go to the cross, after all of his promises, you would think that when they saw the mockery and the beating and the spitting and all that going on, you would think when they saw that, they would be like, all right, this is terrible. This is what Jesus was talking about, and they're lamenting. I mean, it's going to hurt me painful no matter how you know how the future is going to turn out. It would still be painful at the moment, wouldn't it? I mean, even if they were 100% sure that everything was happening just as he said it would happen in their lives, but he's promised, hey, don't worry, it'll be good in the end. Don't you think it would still be painful? You know, I think about that even in a personal reflection, like somebody you dearly love and care for when they die, and let's say you're 100% sure they're going to come up in a resurrection, is it not still painful? Right? And so he says, you're going to be terrible, it's going to be awful, but don't worry, your sorrow will be turned into joy. Verse 21, he says this, a woman, when she has travail, has sorrow. So he says, when a woman's in labor, she's sorry about being pregnant. Any woman testify to that? Yeah, right? You're not happy about it. Because her hour is come. But as soon as she's delivered of the child, I love this wording, she remembers no more the anguish. And I've always been amazed by that. How a woman can have a baby twice. Right? And so Jesus says, look, here's how it happens. And it just happens this way. She will be in travail, sorry that she's there. As a matter of fact, if she could go back and do it over, she would say, don't do this. Especially when Jesus is talking here, they didn't have the epidural. They didn't have the little drip they put in your IV to take off the edge. When a woman was in travail, it was a life or death moment. A lot. Lots of pain. But Jesus says after she has the baby, she remembers no more the anguish for the joy of a man that is born into the world. And then he says, and ye now therefore have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart shall rejoice, and your joy no man takes from you. I love how he compares that to the woman having a baby. In other words, listen, all of your lives, every one of you in your life will have problems. I mean, that's not like, wow, Pastor, you gave us some time and deep thought there. No, I mean, you all know that. You're going to have problems, right? It's going to be bad. As a matter of fact, I'm going to guess that probably all of you, without an exception in here, all of us haven't had our worst day yet. That's what Jesus was telling the disciples. You're going to have a day, and he was telling them, by the way, when he was speaking this, their day was coming that evening. Thursday night, if you will, beginning of Friday biblically. That was when it was coming. It was going to get really bad. He said, but don't worry. No matter how bad it gets, your joy will be even greater. Just like a woman having a baby. And it does crack me up. I mean, you go and you watch a woman, like I was there through the whole process, right? Right as soon as the baby's born, it's like the pain just went away. I mean, they may still have some pain or something, but it's like it just went away and they've forgotten all about it. Because the joy of having the baby born. Do you know that all the pain and struggle and trials that you and I may have in this life, when Jesus comes, you won't even be able to remember them? I remember reading one time in the Spirit of Prophecy along the lines that said that when they had a vision, we got to heaven, and somebody asked them that had passed away prior, that was there then, what was it like after we passed away? And they said, we couldn't remember how bad it was. The joys of heaven was so great they couldn't remember how bad it was. And just imagine that. Imagine now, no matter how bad your worst day is, one day it's not as bad as how good things are going to be. As a matter of fact, things are going to be so good in the future that you won't even be able to recall how bad things were. So Jesus tells them, you're going to be terribly disappointed. You will have great sorrow, but don't worry. It will be followed with joy that no one can take away. Did you read that there in verse 22? A joy that no one can take away. Now, this is fascinating. I've heard some people talk about this very thing. The disciples, when they went around preaching that Jesus was risen from the dead, the facts of the matter, can that possibly be true? Could they be making this up as a lie? Remember, that's a secular point of view. It's like, is it possible for these disciples just to made up the story about the resurrection in order to save face? And the conclusion through studying like trial, they've come to is that it's not possible for them to have made up the story that just to save face, because they were willing to die for that truth. They were willing to die rather than happen. And I can guarantee you, if it hadn't happened and it come down to life or death, if you're going to preach that Jesus rose from the dead, we're going to kill you, they would have said, okay, I'm just kidding. But they were willing to die rather than deny that, which shows that joy was on their heart so much that they actually could die with joy. Anybody here ever thought about that? Dying with joy. Knowing 100%, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this death is good. That there's going to be, it's like planting a seed, you're going to have the plant come up. When you plant the seed in the ground, you're pretty certain it's going to grow up and give you fruit. It's going to give you what you need, right? And you have the certainty that it's going to have everything you want. And so, in the same way, Jesus had told them, this is how it's going to happen. And it happened. And when he was resurrected, no one could take away their joy. Wouldn't you like to live like that? What a plan. And it happened just as Jesus said, by the way. Even after Jesus warning them over and over that he'd be raised the third day, even after he told them they would weep and lament, they would not see him again for a little while, then they would see him again. That's one of my most favorite lines too, by the way. You won't see me for a little while, but then you'll see me again. I mean, you think about that one. Like, what's he mean by that? They would have to ask the question. And then, so he's dead, he's in the grave, they don't see him for a little while. The women come and say, hey, he's rose from the dead. And they're like, I don't believe you. Remember that? We call it doubting Thomas. Not one disciple believed the story of the women. But he had told them, a little while you won't see me, then a little while you'll see me again. They still didn't get it. They didn't understand. After all, James and John were planning to be king, or vice king and secretary of state. Judas Iscariot had plans to be treasury, running the Federal Reserve. Peter was planning to be the top military advisor. After all, he was the one with the sword. He was going to run the army. And Jesus was planning to die so that he could forgive them for all their plans. He knew what day was coming. Now it's late Thursday night actually. Biblical Friday. And let's pick it up in John 18, verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Kedron, where was a garden, unto the which he entered and his disciples. Now listen to verse 2. Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place where Jesus oftentimes resorted, thitherto with his disciples. Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, comes thither with lanterns, torches, and weapons. You think about how funny that is. They come with weapons to arrest Jesus. After all, I heard one of his followers carries around a sword. Peter, the zealot, doesn't record if any of the others are armed or not. But they come to arrest Jesus with torches and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth and said unto them, now I love this a lot, who do you seek? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said unto them, I am he. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. As soon as he had said unto them, I am he, they went backwards and fell to the ground. Now, if you read the storyline and start putting things together and read commentaries on it, this is so good. Whenever Jesus says, I am he, and they all fell down, Peter grabs his sword. This is it. We got him. Look, Jesus just spoke the word, I'm he, and knocked him to the ground. They got back up, and he's ready to fight, ready to die for the cause. Now, Jesus had told him, you guys, you're getting ready to have a really bad day. What you're thinking is not my plan. But yet, they answered, whenever he said that, and they fell down, and it goes on and says, then asked he them again, who do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus answered and said, I've told you that I'm he. If therefore ye seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled, which he spoke of them, which thou gavest me, I lost none. And so Jesus was already making plans. He said, look, I'm going to surrender to you, but let these guys go away. He already knew they were going to run. A really bad day, huh? He knew that his closest followers were going to leave him. But Simon Peter, having drew his sword, he smote off the priest's ear, the servant of the high priest's ear, so he cuts his ear off. I've read and I believe that Peter was actually aiming for his head. In our terms, he wasn't a very good shot. But then it says in Luke's version of this that Jesus answered and said, allow it to be, and he touched his ear and healed him. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm standing there with a rabble mob, and Jesus speaks and says, I'm he, and it knocks me to the ground, I get back up, Peter cuts off Malchus's ear, and Jesus puts it back on, I'm walking away. You think about that, right? But yet, by the way, it also gives you an idea just how far sin can take you, and hatred and anger. They didn't leave. And it goes on, it says the servant's name was Malchus. Then said Jesus to Peter, put your sword away into its sheath. The cup which my Father has given me, shall not I drink it? Good storyline. I want you to picture being a disciple right now. Picture being Peter or one of the other disciples. Because it's at this time now that Jesus allows himself to be arrested. Peter thought they were going to take the kingdom. It was time. Pulls out the sword, cuts off Malchus's ear. Jesus heals the enemy and allows himself to be arrested. Verse 12, the band and the captain and the officers of the Jews took Jesus and bound him and led him away to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest that same year. And I always thought that was kind of funny when you read that. They should have took him to Caiaphas. He was the high priest, but you couldn't really trust him. He was kind of a rookie, so they took him to his dad. Father-in-law, rather. Now Caiaphas was he which gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die for the people. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple, which was John. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the place of the high priest. Now, incidentally, Judas has betrayed him, so that was one gone. That leaves 11. John and Peter follows him in there. The other 9 scatter. Now, keep in mind, this is happening really, really late at night, early in the morning, as we're going to read here. As a matter of fact, they've been up basically all night. Anybody here ever stay up all night? Stay up all night? You know how you feel, especially in the next morning? You kind of have this, you almost feel like icky. I'll tell you what, when I stay up all night, I almost feel like I've sinned. Anybody ever feel like that? You just feel guilty. Anybody ever feel that way? It's like I feel tired and guilty. Right? So I'm trying to picture now if I was with Jesus and the disciples and I just saw these things. If I were Peter and I just cut off a guy's ear and Jesus gets on to me about cutting off his ear and puts it back on, and I've been up all night and I'm tired and I'm following along, how would you feel? It's the beginning of his worst day ever, Good Friday. I think they'll call it Black Friday. It's not a Good Friday. It's dark. And so it goes on. Simon followed and so did John. Now, when they got there, Peter stood outside the door in verse 16. Then went out that other disciple, which was known to the high priest, this was John, and he spoke unto her, kept the door, and brought in Peter. So Peter now is allowed to come in. Now the disciples have all run away, except, obviously, Judas, John, and Peter. The other 9 are gone. What Jesus had just told them hours before had come to pass. And it's about to get worse. You ever had a bad day? And it get worse? I have. It's those days whenever it gets worse and you're like, you don't want to ask it, but you say, can it possibly get any worse? The answer is always yes. It's about to become the worst day of their lives, even for Judas, who just got paid an extra paycheck. The worst day ever. Not Good Friday, but Black Friday. John 18, verse 19. The high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine. Jesus answered and said, I spoke openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither the Jews always are, and in secret have I said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask them which heard me what I have said unto them. Behold, they know what I said. And when he had thus spoken, one of the officers which stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand. In other words, he punched Jesus in the mouth, saying, answer the high priest so. Jesus answered him, if I have said evil, bear witness of the evil, but if I have spoken well, why do you hit me? You know, there's no doubt at all that both John and Peter saw this. Now, I want you to picture now if you're Peter, you're standing around the fire around the other people, right? And this happens simultaneously with what I'm about to tell you. It happens all like in simultaneously to the Jesus gets punched in the mouth, smacks him right open-handedly, right across the face. And Peter, standing at a distance, sees it take place. John sees it take place. And they're like enraged in it taking place, but at the same time, seeing Jesus not retaliate, seeing him let it happen, you know that you don't have a hope of defending him and doing anything. What do you think will be going on in your mind? One gal turns to him and says to Peter, aren't you one of his followers too? Isn't that interesting? He smacked in the mouth. Look at it. Follow it down there, verse 28. No, that's not. I'm sorry. Yeah. For 25. Thank you, Winston. Verse 25. And Simon Peter stood and warmed himself and said, therefore unto him, what they said unto him, are you not one of his disciples? He denied it and said, I am not. And you read that and you think, how can he deny his Lord? Jesus had just been punched in the face. Nothing he could do about it. He was still tied. Do you want to be punched in the face too? Are you going to admit to being one of his followers? This is a very bad morning. This is what he's going through. I just want you to kind of picture what was going on. We know we read the story, and I appreciate like the storyline of what Jesus has done, but just imagine being one of the disciples. Imagine particularly being Peter or John, because the rest of them are gone. Imagine being Judas, if you will. And it says, one of the servants of the high priest, whose kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off. So this is like the cousin of Malchus. I think I saw you in the garden with him. Peter then denied again, and immediately the cock crew. And you can imagine what Peter remembers then, because Jesus told him, before the cock crows thrice, you shall deny me thrice. And this is just a summary of that story. If you go to Luke's version and Mark's version, it just simply states it in more detail. And at that time, Peter goes out and weeps bitterly, realizing what he had done. Bad day, isn't it? What would you have done? The one you thought was going to be king was just punched in the mouth, and he seemed to be able to do nothing about it. And someone then turns to you and say, are you one of his followers? What a bad day. John 18, verse 28, then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the hall of the judgment, and it was early. As a matter of fact, the other Gospels give you the time frame of this was. This was about 6 a.m., right? It was early in the morning that this is taking place. It was early, it says here, is all John says. And they themselves went not into the judgment hall. Listen to this. The leaders would not go into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but they might eat the Passover. Going into the judgment hall would make them unclean and would prevent them from keeping the Passover, which was celebrating Christ. And so in order to be able to kill the real Passover, they had to stay out of the judgment hall so they could kill Jesus. Is that not the epitome of hypocrisy? I don't want to defile myself by going in the judgment hall, but we're going to murder somebody. That's why Jesus would say something along the lines, perhaps even to us sometimes, you're clean on the outside, but you're rotten on the inside. They themselves will not go. So Pilate went out unto them, and he said, what accusation do you bring against this man? And they answered and said unto him, if he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him unto you. Isn't that interesting how they argue their case there? Why do you even question us? And by the way, that doesn't change a whole lot even to our day. If you have the right person accusing you of something, you're guilty. Because after all, they wouldn't accuse you unless you were guilty, right? That was their argument. Pilate, we wouldn't bring him here unless he was guilty. Why are you asking us this question? Then Pilate said to them, take him and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, it is not lawful for us to put any man to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, saying, what death he should die. Things are now about to get worse. You think you've had a bad day? I mean, your worst day is yet to come. You know that, right? Everybody sitting here, your worst day is yet to come. These guys, the disciples, thought their day was really bad. Now their day is going to get a lot worse. It's not a Good Friday at all. John 19, verse 1, if you go there with me in your Bible, and just telling the story right from the Bible. Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. Very plainly stated. Again, with no emotion. Do you know what scourging is? I mean, do you understand what Christ has done for us? We think of the cross and what Christ has done for us on the cross. I would not want to go through a scourging for any of you. You know, they would take was it cat of nine tails, they call it, and it was basically a piece of leather with little glass shreds and a little piece of metal, and they lay you across something, and they just wear your back out till it just turned to shredded blood. They scourged him. Then it says the soldiers took a crown of thorns, and put it upon his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Anybody here ever tried to put on some clothing on your? I remember. I love it. If you work in a nurse or whatever, or nurse or an emergency room, have you ever had somebody come in that's had a little road rash? Julie said, "Yep." And they love when you put bandages on the road rash, don't they? Because what happens? It sticks, right? It sticks in there. And so what they do is, it's bad. They think you're a tough guy because you're on a motorcycle and you crash and got road rash. Then they make you a real tough guy and they take and scrape all that stuff out for you, clean it all out, right? Painful, isn't it? That's how they do it, isn't it? Yeah, I had a friend that had that happen. He said it wasn't no fun at all. And then you can't put anything on it because it sticks, right? Imagine Jesus, his bloody back, and now they put a purple robe on it. And it doesn't take long for the blood to start drying to the purple robe and sticking. And then they get ready to take you to the cross, and they pull the purple robe off, and it just opens the wounds all back and starts bleeding again. That's what he was going through. That's what John was witnessing. That was a very, very bad day, because keep in mind that John and Peter and James and all the apostles, just hours before, had in mind it was going to be the greatest day of their life. Imagine the greatest day of your life coming up, and it turns out to be the worst one you've ever had. Not a very good Friday. So they put the crown on his head, they put the purple robe on him, and then not only was it bad enough to be going through that pain, but then as he's standing there with a crown of thorns and blood running down his face and a purple robe on his back, then they get down on one knee and they start worshiping him mockingly. Hail, King of the Jews! And then they smote him with their hand. They started beating on him. And of course, you have in the other Gospels where they hit him on the head with a stick and drove the thorns into his brow even further. Now, I want you not only to think about from the perspective of how much Jesus was going through for us, but picture it, if you will, with me, from the disciples' perspective. Imagine how bad that day was. Imagine seeing somebody you love dearly that happening to. Somebody's listening to their Bible. That's okay. Very good. Pilate therefore went forth again and saith unto them, Behold, I bring him forth unto you. So now, here's Jesus. Here's Jesus, bloodied. Blood running down his face, purple robe on. Pilate brings him forward and says, Here's your king, O Jews. And of course, you know what they're going to say. We'll read that in a moment. But I want you to picture with me, if you will, those that are standing at a distance and watching it. As a matter of fact, we're going to read just a little bit later on, and you can't help but to understand this to be the case, that the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, the mother of James and John, I guess, these others were watching. Imagine it, if you will. Watching it. How would your day go? Be a good day? And it goes on and says, Then came Jesus forth wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and the Pilate said unto them, Behold the man. And the chief priests therefore and the officers saw him. They cried out, Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate said unto them, Take you and crucify him, for I don't find anything wrong with him. The Jews answered him and said, We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he himself made himself the Son of God. Then Pilate has some conversation with him. We're going to skip over that and go back to the next part in John 19:17. Jesus now bearing his cross, John 19:17, Jesus now bearing his cross went forth to a place called the place of the skull, Golgotha, which is called in the Hebrew tongue, Golgotha. And then it says, again, very plainly, where they crucified him. And two others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the midst. Isn't it interesting just how plainly it speaks it? Almost with no emotion again. There they crucified him. Now keep in mind, while this is going on, multitudes are watching. The disciples, the women, others that he had healed, others that he had taken care of, were all watching. And nothing they could do to stop it. You know, by the way, the worst day you ever have in your life, there'll be nothing you can do to stop it. How helpless is that? How hopeless. That's why I really appreciate what Jesus told them ahead of time. What he tells us ahead of time. Your worst day, deal with it, because it'll be better later. When you get through your worst day, don't worry. There's a place waiting for you. There's a hope waiting for you in heaven that's better than anything you could ever imagine. Just deal with it. You can make it. Cling to that hope. That's what he told the disciples, but they missed it. They missed it altogether because the bad was so bad they couldn't imagine how good the good would be. So then the soldiers in verse 23, the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments, and they made 4 parts, to every soldier a part. They split up his garments. And also his coat. But now the coat was without seam, woven from top throughout. And they said, therefore, among themselves, Let us not rip it up, but let us cast lots for it, whose it shall be. The scripture might be fulfilled, which said, They parted my raiment among them, and for my vesture did they cast lots. These things therefore did the soldiers. Now I want you to imagine that. You're watching this. You see them strip Jesus. By the way, do you know what Jesus was wearing when he was on the cross? His birthday suit. When you're born, you're not wearing anything. And here are the soldiers next to the cross gambling for his clothes, for his outer coat, because it was so nice. Imagine you're his disciple and you're watching that. What would you want from your loved one? How about their garments? Something to remember them by? You can't go take it. Imagine the mother of Jesus. The other disciples watching this take place. Not a Good Friday. And it says, They said therefore among themselves, Let us not rip it up. So they gambled for it. I'm going to read you now from Matthew chapter 27. We got to skip around a little bit so we can get the time frame here. This is all taking place. But Matthew chapter 27, if you'll turn there with me, I want you to notice what happens. Did you know that in this terrible day for the disciples, Roman soldiers were used to and accustomed to doing this? I mean, for a living, they would cut off people's heads and arms and things like that. Not a big deal to crucify somebody. They would usually enjoy it. If you can imagine that, they enjoyed crucifying somebody. They kind of got used to it. Did you know, by the way, that happens oftentimes with people that are mass murderers, that do serial killers and things like that. They get to where they enjoy it. Can't imagine that, right? But they enjoy it. And so here we have the story of these soldiers that are around the cross, and they're not doing something that was out of the ordinary for them, and not something that was like, oh, this is terrible. Matthew 27:45, now from the 6th hour, about noon, there was darkness over all the land till the 9th hour. For 3 hours, complete darkness. You think that would get your attention? Imagine being a disciple. I would have to think that the foreboding that I would be seeing is like, I would be so worried, even as a disciple, thinking something bad is happening and it's going to get worse. Right? I mean, would it not scare you, everything getting dark? You're seeing Jesus die on the cross. You see all this happening. Now it's getting dark. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out and saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Imagine hearing that as a disciple. I thought he was the Son of God. I thought he was the Christ, and now he's crying out, God, why have you forsaken me? Would you be discouraged? You heard Jesus cry out, why have you forsaken me? Would you be discouraged? Ready to give up? I almost think that sometimes we have this storyline here, and we have this because this is the worst day that possibly could have ever happened to any man on the planet. You couldn't get a day any worse than this to say, oh, you're having a bad day? Well, let me tell you about my day. Right? You couldn't have a worse day. And I love this because after the darkest part of this, whenever Jesus himself cries out, God has forsaken him, when he's dying on the cross, when he's been beaten, when everything that you've hoped for is now gone, God wants you to know that there's hope forever. There's hope for eternity. There's going to be a better day. Even for you. Because you know, the Bible does say pretty clearly we're going to have a pretty bad day, those that live to see Jesus come. You're going to have a pretty bad day before that happens. And then some of them that stood there, when they heard that, said, this man calls for Elias. Straightway one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. I picture that too, by the way. The cross, as we've studied before, wasn't like when you have that vision of the cross, like he's like his feet are like this high off the ground, you know, in those pictures you see. No, that's not how they, remember they would wag their finger in his face and they were mocking him. It's likely that Jesus' feet were only about maybe this high off the ground, which would put him up about 8 or 10 feet for his face or whatever. They still had to put something on a stick to hand him something to drink, but he was low enough so when the people come by, they could get in his face and mock and ridicule. That's the way they would crucify. That was the most effective. Yeah, by the way, it's much easier if someone's making fun of me and I'm far away than if you're making fun of me in my face. You ever notice that? And so keep in mind, that's how, when they would do the crucifixion, they would keep you to make it as miserable on you as you can. So when the disciples were even watching from a distance, he wasn't that far away. The anguish. So they filled it with vinegar and put it on the end of a stick, and they gave him to drink. And the rest said, no, let him be alone. Let's see whether Elias, will come and save him. They misunderstood what he had said. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, at that moment, the veil of the temple was ripped in twain from top to bottom. And for those who haven't been here for the study time on that, the veil of the temple was on average 4 inches thick, and it was like 10 feet high. And it was ripped from top to bottom, exposing the holy place to the most holy place, something that no one ever looked upon. And so this happens right as Jesus dies on the cross, by the way, signifying the sacrifices were no good anymore. And then it says, the veil of the temple was ripped in twain from top to bottom, the earth quaked, and the rocks rent. Rocks were shaking and busting open, and the graves were opened, and many of the bodies of the saints which slept woke up, they arose, which again is an interesting statement on what happens when someone dies. If they're already someplace, what's the purpose of the graves opening up and the dead coming out? Can you imagine all this happening? And the graves were open, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after its resurrection. I guess they just hung out there until after the resurrection. And they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Now listen to this, verse 54. First of all, think about if you're a disciple watching on, think about the Roman soldiers who was hardened evil men. When the centurion, the Roman soldier, and they that were with him watched Jesus, saw the earthquake and the things which were done, they feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. The first ones to claim a belief in him being the Son of God at his crucifixion were Roman soldiers. Shame on you disciples, right? Many of the women that were there beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him, Among them was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's children. They all saw it. The Roman soldiers were the ones that proclaimed him to be the Messiah, or to be the Son of God. The disciples, well, they had a very bad day. Do you know what they did, by the way, as we're wrapping this up to the end? You know what they ended up doing? They went into hiding, mourning, saddened, afraid for their own lives that they may be the next ones. Remember that Jesus told them, "You shall weep and lament." This is hours before. You will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow shall be turned into joy. The worst day ever, followed by the worst Sabbath ever. But then on Sunday morning, their sorrow would be turned into joy. Jesus predicted it would be just this way. He also predicts that those living in the last part of this earth's history will have a very bad day, followed by unspeakable joy. I want to just tell you, I hear the preachers on TV, your best is yet to come. Let me tell you, your worst is yet to come. Your worst day is yet to come. Don't be discouraged. If the disciples would have listened to Jesus when he told them their worst day was coming, they would not have been so discouraged. Let me give you the rest of the story here. I won't want you to give up because I want you to notice what happens in Matthew 28, verse 28. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and he came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. His countenance was like lightning, his raiment was white as snow. And for the fear of him, the keepers did shake and became as dead men. I always loved that. Hardened Roman soldiers. I can picture them in the fetal position when the angel shows up at the tomb. And then it says, the angel answered and said to the women, "Fear not, for I know that you seek Jesus, which is crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he had said." The angels heard it. Why are you so sad? Did not God tell you it would be this way? I love that to the end of time. When things are going really, really bad, when you're having your worst day ever, did God not say it would be this way? Don't be sad, for now he is risen. Come and see the place where the Lord lay, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he's risen from the dead. And behold, he goes forth into Galilee. There shall you see him. Lo, I have told you. Once again, prophetically, just like it was told. Don't worry. So they departed quickly from the sepulchre with fear and great joy, and did run to his disciples with the word. And as they went to tell the disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, "All hail." And they came and held him by the feet and worshiped him. Very simply, Jesus told them, as now he tells us, in this world you're going to have sorrow and troubles. You're going to have a lot of problems. But be of good cheer, he says, I've overcome the world. Your worst day is yet to come. He warned them of the same. But don't give up, because your very best day is to follow. It's easy to condemn the disciples. It's easy to talk about how they should have just hung in there. But how often does this happen to us? How often do we doubt God's word and act as if it's not true? For example, you know as a Christian that Jesus has promised to return one day and establish his kingdom. But how often are you overwhelmed and overcome by the fear of the future? Jesus said unto them one last time, You now therefore will have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart shall rejoice, and your joy no man takes from you. I just wanted to share the story of Jesus, what he did that day, that weekend for us, about 2,000 years ago. And he's promised us that even now you're going to have bad times. But be faithful, because Jesus has promised that our joy will one day be turned in, our sorrow rather, one day will be turned into joy. Don't give up. What a story that was, huh? One day that crucified and risen Savior is going to come and take us where he is. Be faithful.